When we were living on a half acre, we really didn't have plans of moving. When we were there, we were like, okay, what can we do on a small scale? We were pretty content on a half acre. And so my husband kept mentioning rabbits, and my response was no. Like, I had pet rabbits as a kid. We are not going to get rabbits to eat for meat. Not going to happen. And within 6 months of having these rabbits, I had fell in love with them and had taken over the whole operation.
This is continuing on with our small scale homestead topic series. And rabbits are a perfect animal, a livestock to start for small scale. You can pretty much put them anywhere, and Laura will share that with us. So, Laura, thank you for being here, and I'm just glad that you are here.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So let's get started by introducing you to my audience, my listeners. Give us some background and how long have you been homesteading and that sort of thing.
Sure. So I am originally from Southern Indiana. I moved away at 19 to Tennessee, and I have been here ever since. My husband and I have been homesteading since we got married in 2011. And I grew up gardening, but I always wanted to be on a farm. We didn't have any animals besides cats and dogs and your typical pets. And so we started out living on the campus while my husband finished his degree. We had a trailer on campus that we put a couple raised beds in, and we landscaped, and I was making homemade bread and all these meals from scratch and just learning a lot about where my food came from. So I would say at heart, I have been a homesteader from the beginning. In fact, one of the first gifts that my husband ever gave me was this book called Backyard Market Gardening. I made it far enough to see that the most important ingredient to gardening, and what I would say this homestead life, is the soil, what you're starting your roots out in. And so that's kind of the mindset I had going into this life. And what is my roots? What is the soil? What is my foundation and purpose for living this life? And
Oh, I
so
love that.
I fell in love with the idea of nourishing my family through food and time together and having a purpose. And so we dove into it. We had a half acre in Knoxville for 6 years. We had a huge garden, chickens and rabbits and fruit trees and bushes and everything. We were reaching the point of we want more. We didn't have a lot of money to get a lot more,
Mhm.
but we had enough saved up from our previous house when we sold that to get 5 acres. And so now we have 5 acres, a house, a short-term rental, huge gardens, a nice barn, and 3 acres now fenced in with sheep. And we have rabbits and chickens still as well.
Awesome. I love the barn part. Something I really wanted when we were looking for property here in Georgia. I'm like, I don't really care about the house as much. If I have a really nice barn, we didn't get a nice barn or any barn, actually. We just got a nice house, which is fine too. But I was like, I could live in a barn.
Yeah, I will say our barn is living on a prayer. Like all four corner posts are rotted out, and it just sits there.
Well, it's at least you can take pictures in front of it and
Oh
that
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
thing.
it's Instagram worthy, I'll say that. And it houses our animals, so it is sufficient.
So what got you started with rabbits? Like, why did you choose that as an animal to raise, and what do you raise them for?
Yeah, so when we were living on a half acre, we really didn't have plans of moving. When we were there, we were like, okay, what can we do on a small scale? We were pretty content on a half acre. And so my husband kept mentioning rabbits, and my response was no. Like, I had pet rabbits as a kid. We are not going to get rabbits to eat for meat. Not going to happen. And so about 2 years of him talking about it finally brought me around to the idea, because I would see it pop up in books and podcasts and YouTube videos about how sustainable rabbit meat was. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. You can do it. Get the cage, get the rabbits. I want nothing to do with it. This will be your thing. And so he did. He went and got the cage all by himself. And then when it came time to go get the rabbits, I was like, can I go with you? And so I did. I went with him, and then he's like, well, you can pick them out since you're here, And so I picked them out and I was still on the fence of trying to figure out how I could connect myself with them or keep me at a distance, to guard myself from what was going to happen. And within 6 months of having these rabbits, I had fell in love with them and had taken over the whole operation
Mm,
from gathering the poop to breeding to taking care of the kits. I did everything except for dispatch the rabbits. I was still uncomfortable with that. It made me a little bit uncomfortable because I had never experienced processing my own animals before. And so, after about 2 years of watching him do it and people asking, I was convicted and felt the need, okay, I've got to learn how to do this. And so I started getting my hands in there and learning how to process them as well. So I will say I didn't just dive into rabbits and say, I want to raise rabbits for me. This is my thing. It was my husband's thing that slowly became my thing. And
okay.
I saw the beauty of it and saw the benefits of it and how honestly easy it is to do and how simple it is to raise meat for a
Mm,
family, even on such a small scale and in such a small space.
okay. That's awesome. I like that story of how it happened. Like, you didn't just like, "I'm gonna raise rabbits." You're like, That's kind of where I'm at. I had rabbits I had a rabbit when I was a teenager. Her name was Dottie, but I have this cute factor that's hard for me to get over. Even with when we process chickens or any of the poultry, my husband did that part of it, the killing part, and
Mhm.
I did the processing part because once it's not alive anymore, it's not it was easy and it gets very clinical for me at that point. But my husband also doesn't like to he struggles with the cuteness factor as well.
So I had the opportunity the past 2 days to talk with every fourth grader in my county. And
Mm,
I got to teach them what I call the 5 F's of rabbit. And that's been basically the 5 reasons we have rabbits in America today.
mm,
And what was so fascinating to see these kids' eyes light up when I told them the reason why we have domesticated rabbits in America today is for food. They came
mm,
over on the ships with the early explorers as a quick protein source when they got here. So they didn't have
mm,
to spend their time hunting for meat. They had it readily available. And
mm,
so when I think about that and think about why we even have them here, it helps me to step back into perspective and have that appreciation that they do have another purpose besides being cute
right. Mhm,
and provide and takes that personality that we want to put on animals or that
mm,
humanness we want to put on animals out and says, no, these animals are here to serve us and
right.
we are to respect them in return. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, culturally, our culture just now, at least in the history, they did, but we don't eat rabbit regularly, so they became pets, and so it's hard, but,
mhm,
like, cultures around the world are doing, you know, are doing this and other things that we don't see as, you know, a good option. So it's just how we were raised, even just taste, palate, different cultures eat goat, and a lot of people here in the States don't like goat because of the taste or whatever it
mhm.
is. But it can be learned, like you're saying, it can be learned, and we can appreciate both the part that it's designed to help us, but also we can appreciate their life sacrifice for us,
Yeah.
yeah. It's a
It,
hard I'm sorry, I was gonna say, it's a very hard place to be eating an animal you respect.
yeah.
But it's necessary, and I mean, there are a lot of vegetarians out in the world, and that's fine, no I actually was a vegetarian at one point, and I learned that I needed you know, I kind of changed my thinking on that. But it's hard for our society to just embrace this sometimes, I think, to know your food.
So I share this story as I was sitting in a restaurant. I typically say it was Chick-fil-A because it was.
Mhm.
And I'm
Mhm.
sitting there eating this chicken wrap, and I think to myself, where did this chicken come from?
Mhm.
What housing was this chicken in? How was this chicken cared for? What did this chicken eat? How far did this chicken travel to get to the restaurant for me
Mhm.
to eat it? How was it processed and handled? And I was thinking, I none of these answers. And
Mhm.
that's when I really got to thinking and coming around to the idea that, you know what, like it. it's really an utmost respect thing to the animal to know its care, to know
Mhm.
how it was taken care of, to know its life and its housing and how far it had to travel to be processed. And I don't know if you've ever been on the interstate and saw a semi truckload full of chicken,
Mhm.
but I just
Yeah.
look at that and think, ugh, like I
It's
know
sad.
that's a part of the way things are to feed the masses in our culture. I
Mhm.
know that there's some of that that can't be erased. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that it has to be, but for me and my family, I can make small changes to make that imprint smaller or condense it or reduce it just a little bit. And
Right, yeah.
so I share with people to think about, where is the food that you're eating coming from and how was it treated? I
Mhm.
choose to treat my food with the utmost respect. It really is a beautiful process when you step back and you look at it and you can give appreciation to that animal's life before you
Mhm.
sacrifice it. And I want to encourage people to think about that, to think about how you can show it respect and
Mhm.
appreciation. And, I get a lot of flack from vegans for teaching people how to raise their own meat. And
Mhm.
what speaks to me the most is when the vegan says, you know what, I really appreciate that you care about the animals. I may choose not to eat them, but I appreciate that you care and that you're doing
Mhm.
the best you can. And so I think that's the agreement that I would like. We can eat differently, but as long as
Mhm.
we realize that meat eaters that are doing it themselves are doing it because they care so deeply about the animal.
Right.
They don't want them to go through some of the processes that they are going through.
That is I always wanted to be a veterinarian when I was young, and because I wanted to save animals' lives and things, but when I became a homesteader, it really helped me understand that my love, like you're saying, for them is why I want them to come to be through me. I want their end of their life to be through, the care I have for them, and not have them suffer long and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. Okay, so what type like, give us some real tactical some real
Sure.
steps, like, what type of housing options are there for rabbits? And you also use yours for garden, you said you collect the poop, that's for gardening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it
So we have our main breeders in our barn. Really, you just need something that has three sides for wind protection and a covering for rain protection. And if you are in a colder climate, you can always add a tarp or a fourth side in the winter months if you need to. A lot of people start out with what we call a breeding trio, and that is two does and a buck,
Mhm.
and that will get your family a decent amount of meat in a year. You can choose to have your babies grow out in the cages with the moms, or you can choose to separate them so that you can rebreed mom sooner and have more babies. So,
Mhm.
how we do it is we do separate the babies at 6 weeks of age. And if they are not sold to another family, or just basically if they're not sold to a family for a pet or for breeding stock, then they go out in what we call rabbit tractors, and they
Mm,
are little mobile houses. We use the Salatin style tractor for
mhm,
these,
mhm,
and they get moved on pasture every day. So essentially they are taking our grass and turning it into protein for our family. This is
mhm.
grass that we would normally mow, and we try not to go over the same spot in the yard within 6 months to give any pathogens in the soil to die down and to reduce any disease pressure that they may face from being on the same ground close together. So,
Okay.
depending on your space and what you have, just grow them out all in cages, or you could put them on your yard to help be able to grow more out at a time and to utilize the grass in your yard.
Okay. So do I'm sure I've seen it on your Instagram about these mobile cages, but do they have bottoms?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, you also ask about the poop, which I forgot to
All
mention.
right. Uh-huh.
When they're in the cages, you can collect all the poop. When
Mhm.
they're in these tractors, they do not have a solid bottom. They have wooden slats. I think ours are currently like an inch and 3/4 separated, and that those are down there because rabbits will dig out. A lot of people,
Mhm.
if you do
Yeah.
something like a chicken wire or a wire bottom, it will smash the grass down and the grass can't come up through. But with
Okay.
the wooden slats, grass can come up between those slats and allow the rabbits to eat the grass. So
Okay.
we do lose the manure per se to our yard
Mhm.
by having the rabbits out on pasture. But I will tell you, we have the greenest backyard in the county from these
Wow.
rabbits. And it was
Yeah.
amazing to see this spring because like we couldn't stay on top of mowing it. It was
Wow.
so lush and full from these rabbits being out there on pasture. So
Wow. And so, rabbit manure is one that you can put straight on in your garden. Is that correct?
yes, rabbit manure
Mhm.
is a cold compost, meaning it can be used directly on your plants. The same day it comes out of the rabbit's behinding, it can go on your plants.
That's awesome.
Unlike chicken or cow that has to wait up to 6 months before it can be used. Making
Mhm.
it a very valuable fertilizer. It is 2 parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, and 1 part potassium.
Okay. That's
NPK.
awesome. That's actually my motivation really for wanting to get rabbits, and then maybe just having a backup in case we do need food. We'll have a male and a female, and then we can just put them together if we need a food source. It's just sort of like a preparedness thing. I know we could do it if we needed to, despite the cuteness factor. I've done things, I've had to do things over the years. I had to get past my issues to do the things. So I know we can. But, like, right now, I don't particularly want to raise them for meat, but if I were to get into rabbits for that purpose, is there a specific breed that would be best for that?
Yeah, so there are several different ones you can use. I want to say before I even list the breeds is that if you have a garden, you need a rabbit.
Okay, okay.
I want to encourage people, even
Mhm,
if you just have one rabbit out near your garden and you pet it every day and give it a few of your vegetables along with their
mhm.
pellets and water, you are going to get your money's worth out of that
Okay.
rabbit in fertilizer for your garden. It is a
Mm,
game changer for your garden. I've had lots of people buy bunny berries from me, is what I call them,
mhm,
and tell me what a difference it's made for their garden. And they're back again the next year wanting more. So it
mhm,
is invaluable for your garden if you have the time and the space, get you a rabbit.
mhm.
So we typically, it's easy to find New Zealand rabbits or Californians. Those are your typical mainstream meat breeds in
Mhm.
America. There are more though. Any rabbit can be a meat rabbit. It just depends on how much meat you want, how fast it'll grow out. We have New Zealand's and we have a polyface line. We also have some Harlequins, all of which are pretty decent sized rabbits that can be used for meat production. Sometimes people will bring in one of the giant breeds like a French lop or what's the huge one?
Mm, I can't
Um,
remember. I actually used to farm sit for somebody who was raising rabbits, and she had those
One of those baby.
Angoras?
We'll take the giant breeds and cross them with more of a medium. American chinchilla is another huge one that people use. I have a book to recommend, and this
Okay.
is Raising Rabbits for Meat by Eric Rapp and Colleen Rapp. They have the largest rabbitry in America.
Wow.
And the reason why they have the largest rabbitry in America is because they work to preserve historic breeds. And that is what you see here are a couple of the breeds that they work to preserve.
Okay.
Oftentimes, most rabbit breeders have what we call meat mutts, so they're not necessarily pedigree or
Mhm.
100% of a breed in particular, but people that do conservation, obviously, they have 100%. And they also get a very high grow out rate, meaning they have a lot of meat when they process because they have worked hard to preserve these breeds that were great for meat production. I'm trying to remember exactly what breeds it is that they use here.
I thi the big giant a good book? Yeah, so we'll include that name in the show notes as well so that people can check that out. The big breed that you're talking about, whatever the name is, I
Yes.
think my friend crossbred it with the Angora because it was a big fluffy one.
Oh, okay.
So
How
and
fun is that?
yeah. It was really cute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is so neat. So that I guess I could circle into the 5 F's of rabbits. And the
Okay,
first
yeah.
one I mentioned is food. The second one is fertilizer, which we have hit on. The third one is fur, and that would
Mhm.
be where you're actually harvesting the animal to use the fur to do things like line a coat, make a pillow.
Okay.
The animal's life has to be sacrificed. And then there's fiber, which in the case of an Angora, the animal's life isn't sacrificed. They shear or trim off that hair to use it. And then number 5 is a friend, which is most commonly why people have rabbits in America today.
Yeah. Okay, I love that.
The
Five,
5
what it
F's of rabbits. Yeah.
5 F's of rabbits. That's cool. Okay. So the breeding process. Now, rabbits breed like rabbits. So, how do you control that? I know that the males are separate, but like what's your process when you're breeding?
Sure. You
Yeah.
take your doe to your buck. You
Mhm.
never want to put a buck in a doe's cage. I will take my
Okay.
doe to my buck. And I actively breed middle of August through April. I will not do any breeding in the month of May, June, or July. It is simply too hot for our rabbits here in the South.
Mm.
It's not worth the risk. There are some breeds of rabbits that are designed. The Texas A&M has a Tamuk rabbit that is designed to tolerate the heat
Mm.
very well. I don't have any of those, but if you're in even further climate than me, that might be something you want to look into. But we give our rabbits the months off in the summer because it is so hot. The bucks go sterile, the
Mm.
does overheat, and they're wearing that winter coat that I talked about all
Mm.
year long. And so it's
Mm.
really hard on them. If you're in a northern climate, you can probably your breeding cycle may be reverse of mine.
Mm.
And some people still breed year round up north. For us here in the South, it's hot and it's
It
hard
is hot.
going out there to care for them. I feel like they deserve that break. I need that break. Our schedules need that break. And so
Right.
for us, we take off those months. But otherwise, when I'm in my heavy breeding cycle at 4 weeks old, when those babies are 4 weeks old, which their gestation is 28 to 35 days. So
Okay.
usually kindling around 31, 32 days. And then when those babies are 4 weeks old, I will take that mama out, put her in the buck's cage to rebreed, put her back in with her babies for 2 more weeks. And then I wean those babies off at 6 weeks, leaving behind 1 or 2 rabbits to help dry mama up just for a few days. And then I remove those babies, and mom has about a week and a half to live on her own before she gets the nest box to kindle again. And so that is the process we have over and over again from middle of August through April. The average litter size is around 8 rabbits. I have had rabbits that had litters up to 14. So
Okay.
when you have larger litters, oftentimes you have what I call faders, and that is some that just don't make it because the litter is so large.
Mm.
And mama only nurses once or twice a day. And if you have one not strong enough to get to the teat, it just becomes a fader.
Yeah. That's an interesting fact about the rabbits that I didn't realize until oh, I forgot to mention, I've raised several wild rabbits before.
Oh, okay.
We raised 2 jackrabbits when we were in California, and through that process of trying to figure out how to care for them, I fed them goat milk. We were, had our goat milk, our goats at the time. And through that process, I learned that the mother only comes to the nest once or twice a day. Because I had tried several times to save rabbits before that because they'd have their litter in our hay or something, or the dog would bring one or something like that. And I was thinking the first time I did it, I was thinking they needed to be warm. They don't need to be warm. Like you don't want to, at least wild rabbits, they don't like to be warmed, just they don't need a heat source anyway.
No, no, they huddle together to keep warm.
Yeah.
Their body heat alone works together.
Yeah. And so that was the first mistake I made, and the second mistake I made was trying to feed them. Anyway, so those are the first 2 mistakes I made with the first couple rabbits that I tried. But the jackrabbits, they were a little bit older. They were the cutest things ever. They had the big giant ears. I recently had another nest in my garden, and I remembered like mama's only going to come once or twice a day, so I just better leave this here. I left it, I covered it so that make sure that she could get in because it was in a really bad spot. She just put it in tall grass. So yeah, that is just an interesting fact that I learned, and I didn't realize I don't know why it would be different, but I didn't realize domestic rabbits were the same.
And so I get a lot of messages this time of year, or even have people pull in my driveway with like a box of wild rabbits or something. And I'm like, I don't touch them. I don't mess with them
Mhm.
personally. They carry diseases that can be
Mm.
transmitted to mine. And
Right.
also, oftentimes, if you find a litter, their dog will find a litter in the yard, or the lawnmower will mow over it, or something
Mhm.
like that. The success rate of you trying to do some intervention is so low
Mhm.
that I often say it's not worth it, or they still may be fine, or that mama may have already weaned those babies. Oftentimes in the wild,
Mhm.
moms go out and rebreed the same day they've had their litter, if not in the
Mm.
middle of having their litter,
Mm.
because that is their nature. That is what they're created to do. And so the time those babies are 4 weeks old, their mom has done abandoned them and they've got
Yeah.
to figure it out on their own. And so if they have their eyes open and they're hopping around, more than likely they're going to survive. And they're prey animals. And so their success rate isn't high
Mhm.
anyways, so that's why they have a lot of them. They have to
Right.
have it
Mhm.
all to have their chance to survive. And so
Yeah.
I often tell people, don't even try and mess with them. Let nature do its thing. There'll be
Yeah.
more. And a
Just
big
yeah.
heart. People
Yeah.
have this big heart and they want to save them, but
Yeah, and I think that's especially true with the ones with the eyes closed still. The baby rabbits need something from their mother at that point, and they cannot get it from any other source. I don't
yeah.
remember what it was exactly, but they need something from them when their eyes are still closed and they're still at that stage. When their eyes are open, like you said, more than likely, mama rabbit's actually really close, and they'll find her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't even do intervention with my own rabbits. I've tried
Mm,
a few times to do things, but for the most part, I've done it long enough now that I just let nature run its course and
mhm,
realize that there's only so much I can do. And my time is so valuable. I can only spend so many hours fretting over these little babies. But when mama goes in to nurse these babies, she also stimulates their genitals, which encourages them to use the bathroom. So if you
mm,
are trying to nurse this baby kit with its eyes shut and not moving much, you've got to also stimulate its genitals to get it to go to the
okay.
bathroom. So
That's
it's quite an
interesting.
involved process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I take the expired kits, I call them, and either
Mhm,
they are dog treats or they go in my freezer to feed a reptile or a bird or something else, or compost them. That's
mhm,
another great way to use them and not let them go to waste too. But
mhm.
uh,
Yeah. How large is your family? I just wanna get like, how many rabbits do you breed for consumption for your family?
yeah, my family is a four, me and my
Okay.
husband and two kids, and we can eat a rabbit for a meal. Like if I roast it, we'll
Mhm,
eat the whole rabbit. If I pull it off the bone and add it to a soup or something like that, it will usually last us a couple more meals as
mhm,
the meat is mixed into other things. And we have 15 breeders. Maybe one of those is a pet, I think. So about 14 breeders, and we breed nonstop August through April. And I sell quite a few rabbits as well, so it's hard for me to give you an
mm,
exact how much we eat and use. But I would say this last weekend we put 10 in the freezer, and then this weekend we have another 10 to put in the freezer. 10 or no, we have 12 to put in the freezer, I think it is. It really just depends on the season, but I would say we probably consume 50 to 100 rabbits a year.
okay, okay. That's a good number range. I had no idea, like, I can think about a chicken. I guess it's kind of like that. Would you say a whole chicken and a rabbit are the same, or would you do 2 to 1 chicken, kind of like size-wise?
So it depends on the chicken. If you're doing the
Mhm,
Cornish crosses, they get pretty big. So those are
mhm,
going to
yeah,
be bigger than my rabbits.
mhm,
We process rabbits at 12 weeks old. So they dress about, they dress about 3 pounds is what
okay,
I try and get my average dress weight to. Sometimes it's a
okay,
little less, sometimes it's a little more. So, and our chickens mostly dress around 5 pounds.
mhm,
I would say, unless you're leaving your rabbits longer, which you can leave them up to 16 weeks without really slowing down your process. It just,
mhm,
they tend to put on more fat beyond the
okay,
12-week process and the fur gets harder to pull off. Some people wait until 16 weeks because
okay,
we processed the first ones and I was like, there's hardly any meat here. But now that we have so many more, I realized how much easier it is to skin them at 12 weeks
mm,
and work with them that young. We do it then.
okay.
But a lot of
That
people wait until there's like 5 pounds live weight to process.
Okay.
So
That
it depends.
brings me to the question you mentioned, fat. Now, that is it true that they don't have, like, if you could not sustain yourself on rabbit meat alone because there isn't enough fat? Is that true? I've heard that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
But I don't,
I'm just like, if somebody wants, I've heard people, especially with dogs, try to feed their dogs only rabbit meat and they don't have enough fat for them.
yeah. So, I mean, older rabbits have, they can have quite a bit of fat. So it just
Okay.
depends on if you want to count that in there too. But I wouldn't want to eat rabbit alone. And when I cook rabbit, I don't use, I mean, I use fat. I don't cook it just alone, especially if I'm roasting it or grilling it. I prefer bacon grease a lot, and I use my homemade seasoned salt on
Okay.
there quite a bit, either grilling it or roasting it. But
Mhm.
no, you do need to add a fat to it because it is so lean, which
Mhm.
if you have a condition where you're needing to consume less fat, it is a great source for that.
Mhm.
And it's so sustainable. They essentially
Yeah.
can take, just like a cow or a sheep, they take the grass, eat the grass, something that we humans cannot digest, and
Mhm.
they turn it into a protein that we need. The value that they have of that is invaluable to me. But no, you cannot live on rabbit alone, and that is correct. If poo hits the fan and I have to live on rabbit alone, I'm going to say, "Dear Jesus, take me home." So,
I guess it would only really affect somebody who's maybe living in the wilderness and that's all they're
yeah,
eating, but most of us have access to fat everywhere. So,
praise the Lord.
what does rabbit taste like? I've never had it. What would you
It's
compare it to?
yeah, it is a combination of chicken and pork, in my opinion, but a lot of people
Mm.
say chicken. Depends for me, it depends on how you cook it. If you're grilling it or roasting it, which if you do either of those with rabbit, you want to do it at a low temperature for a longer time. You don't want to rush
Mm.
cooking rabbit because it is so lean,
Mhm.
and you want to get it just to temperature and not overcook it or it will be dry if you roast it or grill it. If you put it in a pot and boil it and pull it off the bone, it's going to taste more rabbity, and
Mm.
that's where I pull in the pork flavor. It's a little bit different of a flavor than just chicken when you do
Okay.
it in that fashion. It has a little bit, I guess the word would be gamier, but
Mm.
I feel like gamier also comes with a negative connotation or a
Mhm.
negative view on it. It just tastes like rabbit. That's all I
Mhm.
can say.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's all how you cook it. We have a relative that makes really good deer, what is it, venison. The first time I tasted it, I don't know what gamey tastes like because he cooks it so well. So it was, yeah. Okay, warning that the next conversation is going to be talking about butchering. So if you have sensitive ears, you might want to skip this part. Okay, just real quick, give us the process of the meat processing steps that are not like we don't need to go into detail, basically, just like how do you go from having the rabbit to putting it in your freezer?
There's several different methods you can use. You can use a fatal blow, which would be a shot to the head. You can use cervical dislocation, which can be done with a hopper popper or the broomstick method. Or you can do a bop and bleed, which is also a cervical dislocation where you bop the head, bleed the rabbit out. All the methods, except for the fatal blow, involve hanging and bleeding out the rabbit.
Mhm,
And we hang them. That's how we first started. Now we hang them,
mhm,
and you start by getting the hair off the feet, pulling it down. You'll be surprised how easily, especially a younger rabbit. If you remember earlier, I was saying that 12-week
mhm.
mark is kind of the sweet spot for an easy scanning process. Then you just pull the guts out like you would anything else. And it does need to go through rigor mortis in the fridge for about, I say up to 3 to 5 days, up to a week. We had one I processed Saturday, and then we had it on Tuesday, and it was fine. It wasn't
Okay,
tough. So just a few days in there, it needs to go through the rigor mortis process, and we do that in the fridge. You can do it in a dry or wet, either one in the fridge,
okay.
whichever suits you.
So it's not like processing chickens where you put it in an ice bath, you just put it in the refrigerator or
Yeah, so
free.
you can put it in an ice bath depending on how many you're doing. So like if we're doing a bunch, I'll have a cooler out there where I'll have some ice to keep them cool. But unlike chickens that reach a certain age, especially let's say these Cornish cross, if you're not processing them at 8 weeks, they're dying of heart attack in your field. And
Mhm,
so rabbits, you don't have that time pressure like you do with chickens. They can go a few extra days or weeks or whatever. So you don't have to do them all at once. You don't need a plucker. You don't really need anything fancy like a scalds or anything like that. It's just skinning them and removing the innards and then putting it in. You can do the ice bath, but we typically put them in the fridge, not long, rinse them
okay,
off and put them in the fridge within an hour or so of processing them.
okay. Well, that is really good information, and I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing all of that because, especially the parts that make you a little uncomfortable need to be heard as well, because this is how we raise livestock. We have to have these conversations. It sounds clinical and that sort of things, but that's kind of the mindset we need to have, is that these animals are sustaining us. So I would like to hear your pros and cons list, especially the cons list, because the whole interview was talking about the pros pretty much. What is your, like, the cons of owning rabbits? I always want to prepare people for the negative side, other than the cuteness factor, like we mentioned, so that they're prepared for it. So what would you say are the cons of owning rabbits?
Well, I feel like I've been doing long enough that it's hard for me to think about this because I've
Mhm,
just, kind of accepted what it is. But I'm thinking, I mean, maybe the bucks can spray, so maybe some
mm,
urine on you that you don't necessarily want.
mhm,
Not all bucks spray, but occasionally you'll get one that's a little feisty. You can get scratches
mm,
from handling the rabbits. You got to know how to handle the rabbits. They can leave some scars on you. There's things you do have to trim their nails, especially your breeders. I don't trim the nails of my offspring,
mm,
but the breeders, I do trim their nails every month or two. Cleaning, routine cleaning in your area. You got to remove the manure, clean the cages, that type of thing. You do run into disease pressures with rabbits. Rabbits are a pretty sensitive animal.
mm,
I try and reduce as much exposure to other rabbitries as possible. Raising our rabbits on pasture, you are exposing them to disease as well. We have had some cases where we process rabbits from our tractor, and every single one of them has coccidiosis.
mm,
Good news is you can still consume that animal. We just don't consume the liver at that point. So
mm,
there are some environmental pressures with this humid climate that we live in here in the South that could cause you to lose some parts of the animal.
okay.
I think, and that's all the things that go through my mind besides just the daily commitment to go out and feed and water and care for them.
Mhm.
There's not a
Um,
ton of cost. I don't use a vet. You
okay,
can get another rabbit for $30 if that one passes. So there's not a ton of cost involved.
okay, that's good. What about just the does not raising their young? Like, does that happen very often? They just refuse,
Yeah,
or
so
they
oftentimes first time moms will struggle with their litter, not always, but sometimes
mhm,
their first litter will be a challenge. If subsequent litters are also a challenge, that's not a mom you want to keep. I think finding good breeding stock will help eliminate that problem.
mhm,
And knowing your breeders, asking, the people you get them from, like, was the mom of this baby a good mom the first time around, or did she struggle a few times? What's
mhm,
her success rate of her litters? Is she losing a lot in her litters, or is she 100%er? Asking some of those questions. I encourage people to get their rabbit from a breeder where they can ask questions
mm,
versus going into a store and buying their rabbits there where they don't know anything about the gene lines or things like that. So
okay.
also, another option for finding a good quality rabbit is getting some from show rabbits,
Mm,
depending on where you're at. Reach out to your local 4 H department or ag office and see who they know are breeders, reputable breeders in your area. But
okay.
maybe not just hopping on the Craigslist and picking someone may not be the best. It could be.
Yeah.
There could be a reputable breeder on there, but sometimes you have some that are just trying to make a quick buck. I think,
Mhm,
knowing the heart and intent behind the breeder and what they're trying to sell you or give you is important. And they're not just trying to make a buck, but rather sell you a quality animal. So getting good breeding stock from the beginning is important.
yeah, and that's true for all livestock, really. We had a very good bloodlines with our dairy goats. We had La Mancha dairy goats, and she was like, show quality does. They produced a lot of milk, a lot of people, and they were all really great does. Like, she bred for personality and temperament and all those things. And maybe that would solve some of the problems that people have with not liking goats or whatever because of their temperament. If you just went to a breeder who did that for a living and knew exactly where the parents came from and stuff. We had the best goats. I don't know why people throw shade at goats and
Yeah.
having goats.
Well, and I will say with that, you may pay a higher price,
Mhm.
but typically that higher price is worth it because you're
Right.
getting the quality and the lineage information and that type of thing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, for
don't go
sure.
for the cheapest necessarily because rabbits can be cheap. You can find some
Mhm.
for $10 somewhere or $15. And if that's all you have access for, go ahead and try it. You may find yourself getting something good. But if you
Right.
can find someone, like she was saying, a reputable person that pours into their animals, it's definitely worth it.
What is your favorite part of owning rabbits? Like, is it the meat or is it like just the whole thing? What is your favorite part of owning rabbits?
My favorite part of owning rabbits is knowing exactly where my meat's coming from and
Mm,
how it was cared for. Having that relationship with your food is unlike anything I've experienced in the
mhm.
homesteading world or even just in the animal husbandry world. Having that much closeness to your food is quite the experience.
Yes, I would agree with that. What it means, it's not just you're raising animals for food. There's just so much to it, and I can't even put it into words really.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thankfulness, the
Deep appreciation.
yes,
Because we
yes.
will use their bones. I use their bones to make a bone broth, and then
Mhm,
the bones will go to feed my chickens because they're so crumbly after making bone.
mhm. So, do you have anything available for our listeners to purchase to help them get into rabbits or any like a YouTube channel or whatever?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel at Cox Homestead. I have a lot of the basic frequently asked questions I get on there, and I do a little bit of vlogging. You can find me on there. I would love it if you would subscribe and leave a comment so that I know that you're there and learning. I have an Instagram, and that is Cox Homestead _ Kodak. I have Facebook, and that is Cox Homestead Kodak. Our website is www.cox-homestead.com, and you can subscribe to my newsletter there. That is where I release all of my happenings firsthand. If you're on my newsletter, you get everything that I'm doing before anybody on social media.
Mhm.
So I teach a lot of in-person workshops. I teach a gardening 101. We teach how to process rabbits, how to raise rabbits. In the wintertime, I have a live wreath workshop. And we are continuously adding more things here at the homestead. A lot of it being in person. I really thrive in person teaching. We have a short term rental on our farm. So if you are from
Mm.
out of town and want to come see the Smokies, we are an excellent spot. We are right off the parkway, just a couple miles off the interstate, getting you in the direction to go explore the Smokies, Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, and Sevierville. And you have a view of our farm and a 1,000-acre farm across the road. So it is very scenic, and you can find that on our website as well. On my Etsy shop, I have this shirt here,
Oh, yeah, I've
and
seen
let me
that
make
shirt,
sure
yeah.
it may not show up. I can't tell, but
And
it says "Eat more rabbits," which
I
is
love that
how
shirt.
I end every one of my YouTube videos. And you can see I just have a few of these left. There's not many.
Okay,
So if you want to support me in the biggest way possible, getting one of these shirts is the answer. And then
okay.
I also sell DIY elderberry syrup kits. A few times a year, I list my original seasoned salt that you can snag up. So
Okay, awesome. I love that idea. And I think we will take you up on that offer for the Airbnb because, we're not that far from each other and we went to Gatlinburg last year. So I
yeah,
really think I need to do this because I really would love to see what you got there and I can learn from you about
yeah,
rabbits and see your Airbnb set up there. I'll have to tell my husband we need to plan that.
you need a weekend away. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This was a great conversation, and I learned so much. This is a new topic for me, and I love learning about things. And I know my listeners who are interested in this topic also have learned. So I just want to thank you again so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.